Daniel had not planned to visit the hospital that day. As a single father of a 9-year-old boy, his life revolved around routines that left little room for emotional detours. Mornings began before sunrise with packed lunches, ironed uniforms, and whispered prayers over a sleeping child. Days were spent working double shifts at a logistics warehouse, lifting crates and swallowing pride when his back ached more than it should have. Nights ended with homework spread across the kitchen table, bedtime stories read with tired eyes, and the quiet hum of loneliness once his son drifted to sleep. His world had shrunk to survival, and somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that the past was best left untouched. The past, however, had a way of resurfacing when least expected. The call came from an unfamiliar number, and Daniel almost ignored it, assuming it was another unpaid bill or a wrong number. When he answered, the voice on the other end informed him that his ex-wife, Emily, had been admitted to the hospital with severe complications following a sudden illness. They explained that she had listed him as an emergency contact years ago and that no one else had responded. Daniel thanked the caller politely, hung up, and sat in silence as the weight of that information settled into his chest like a stone. Emily was a name he rarely allowed himself to think about. Their marriage had ended not with shouting or betrayal, but with exhaustion, misunderstanding, and a silence that grew so loud it pushed them apart. When she left, she believed she was doing him and their unborn child a favor, convinced that she was the burden holding him back. Daniel never stopped loving her, but love alone had not been enough to keep them together. By the time their son was born, Emily was already gone, leaving behind a note filled with apologies and promises she felt too broken to keep. Raising a child alone had reshaped Daniel in ways he never expected. He learned patience when sleep deprivation tested his limits. He learned humility when he had to ask neighbors for help. He learned strength when he realized his son's smile depended entirely on him showing up every day, no matter how tired or discouraged he felt. Still, beneath all that growth, there was a quiet wound that never fully healed, a question that haunted him during the longest nights about whether he could have done something differently. The hospital visit felt like reopening a door he had spent years barricading shut. He told himself he was going only out of responsibility, not emotion. Emily was the mother of his child, and that alone deserved acknowledgement. He arranged for his son to stay with a trusted friend, put on his cleanest shirt, and drove through rain that blurred the city lights into streaks of color, each mile pulling him deeper into memories he had tried to forget. Hospitals had a way of making time feel strange. The smell of disinfectant, the echoing footsteps, the steady beeping of machines all reminded Daniel how fragile life truly was. As he walked down the corridor toward Emily's room, he rehearsed what he might say, then abandoned every version because none of them felt right. He told himself not to expect anything, not closure, not apologies, not reconciliation. He was there simply to see her, nothing more. He slowed as he reached her door, noticing it was slightly open. Inside, the room was dim, illuminated by soft monitor lights. Emily lay still in the bed, thinner than he remembered, her face pale but unmistakably hers. Another figure stood nearby, a nurse adjusting equipment, and Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to enter or wait. That hesitation changed everything, because it was then he heard Emily speaking, her voice weak but clear enough to carry. She was not speaking to the nurse but to the quiet room itself, confessing thoughts she believed no one else would ever hear. She spoke about regret, about leaving a good man because she felt unworthy of love, about watching from afar as Daniel raised their son alone. She admitted she had followed their lives through social media, through mutual friends, through stolen glimpses of a happiness she believed she had forfeited. She said that if she did not survive, she hoped Daniel would one day forgive her for choosing fear over family. She said his name again, this time like a prayer. Daniel leaned against the wall as the words sank into him, each sentence unraveling years of misunderstanding. He had spent so long believing Emily left because she did not love him enough, because he had failed in some way. Hearing that she left because she loved them too much and believed they deserved better broke him in a way that was both painful and strangely relieving. Tears he had suppressed for years finally escaped, and he covered his mouth, overwhelmed by the realization that they had both been suffering in silence for different reasons. When the nurse left, Daniel gathered himself and stepped into the room. He did not speak at first, simply taking in the woman who had once been his entire world. Emily opened her eyes and saw him, surprise flickering across her tired features. In that moment, years of distance collapsed into a fragile present, heavy with everything unsaid. Daniel did not confront her or demand explanations. He sat beside her, letting his presence speak what words could not. The days that followed were slow and uncertain. Emily's condition remained serious, and Daniel found himself returning to the hospital between shifts, drawn there by something deeper than obligation. He updated her about their son, about his love for drawing and his stubborn refusal to eat vegetables, about how strong and kind he was becoming. Emily listened with tears in her eyes, absorbing every detail as if storing them away forever. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen, not just as a provider, but as a man who had carried more than anyone ever knew. Caring for Emily stirred emotions Daniel thought he had buried. Anger resurfaced alongside compassion, grief alongside hope. He wrestled with guilt for the resentment he had held onto for so long, and with fear of what reopening his heart might cost him. Yet, each time he considered pulling away, he remembered her voice through that door, the honesty of her confession, and he stayed. Eventually, Emily's condition stabilized. Doctors spoke of recovery, of long roads and cautious optimism. On the day she was strong enough to sit up on her own, Daniel brought their son to visit. Watching mother and child see each other for the first time was a moment Daniel would carry with him forever. There was no grand reunion, no dramatic gestures, just quiet tears, small hands holding fragile fingers, and a sense that something lost had finally been found. Life did not magically become perfect after that. Healing rarely works that way. Emily faced rehabilitation and the heavy burden of rebuilding trust. Daniel continued balancing work, fatherhood, and the emotional complexity of allowing someone back into his life who had once walked away. But something fundamental had shifted. The weight he had carried alone felt lighter now, shared in a way he never thought possible. Over time, they began to rebuild not as a married couple chasing a past version of happiness, but as two flawed adults learning to forgive themselves and each other. They focused on what mattered most, creating a stable, loving environment for their son and honoring the pain that had shaped them rather than pretending it never existed. Daniel learned that strength was not just endurance but vulnerability, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is listen.